In the Pokémon Scarlet and Pokémon Violet's Paldea region, trainers can pick 3 starters to choose from: Sprigatito, Fuecoco, and Quaxly. With over 100 Pokémon added in Gen 9, players can now build dynamic teams even using only new additions to the Pokédex. Today, I'm going to be taking a look at the best teams using each of the starters as your first Pokémon. The first thing to do is to take a look at the conditions for making a team. Here's every new Pokémon, and I'll be slowly showing which ones are actually available for our team. The following rules are based on how I usually play the game, so obviously first, the Pokémon must be Pokémon added in Generation 9. I will be including Paldean forms, evolutions of previous Pokémon, and alternative forms of Pokémon. First, we're going to take out Legendaries, which basically can't be used until after beating the game. Then Area 0 Pokémon, which include Paradox Pokémon and the Glimmet line. And of course, starter Pokémon, which are already included on the teams. All these Pokémon aren't really viable for teams before beating the game, so they shouldn't be included. Of course, we're only looking at fully evolved Pokémon to make our decision, so that takes off all the non-final Pokémon that will eventually evolve. When I play, I really like to see my Pokémon go from their basic stages to their final forms, so it's important that we don't pick single stage Pokémon for this list. I realize a lot of these single stage Pokémon are pretty strong and viable, but they're just not as fun to play with, and I think evolving Pokémon is a big part of the game. With that said, we also prefer 3 stage lines to 2 stage lines, but both are included here. All the Pokémon here are technically good to use, but I'm going to take out the ones I personally think aren't fun to use. I know this is super subjective. I took out Dunsparce, Maushold, Paladin, Goldango, Brambleghast, and Kingambit. These were taken out based on their weird mechanics or designs that are just generally not as exciting. Seriously, who is going to play with a Tumbleweed? Next, let's get rid of the Pokémon with worse than 430 as a base stat total. This makes Clodsire the Pokémon with the lowest base stat total on the list, but it has a lot of viability, so it's definitely worth keeping on here. Again, all these rules are based on how I personally play Pokémon, and I'm sure everyone's rules are a little different. Any set of rules could yield a totally different outcome, but the Pokémon on the screen right now are the ones that we can use for these teams. So here we have the template we're going to build the teams on, and we can track which types we hit for super effective damage on the right. I've made 6 rules that we generally follow in order for picking Pokémon. Number 1 is having complete type coverage. Because of this, I took Oinkologne off since it doesn't really do anything for our team. Number 2 is having no redundant types. When a team has a water type, like the Quaquaval team, we automatically are unable to use water types for the rest of the team. The available types we can use will shrink as we continue to choose Pokemon. I'm also putting a slight preference for dual types, which tend to be interesting and also give us more types. I also put a preference for 3 stages because it's usually more fun to watch your Pokemon evolve twice, and those Pokemon also end up being cooler. Of course, we also have a preference for the Pokemon with the higher base stat total, because obviously it's going to be more powerful. Last, we want a complete water, fire, and grass trio if possible with the Pokemon available. So let's get started. Every team needs both a fighting and ground type for normal coverage and electric coverage, since those are their only respective weaknesses. So let's start with finding a fighting type for Meowscarada. Our options are Pawmot and Annihilape. With its higher base stat total, Annihilape has to be our fighting type. Skeledurge also needs a fighting type and has the same options of Pawmot and Annihilape. However, Skeledurge shares ghost type with Annihilape, so Pawmot is our option here. Quaquaval already has normal coverage with its fighting type, so we can move on from normal coverage. Our 6th rule says there's a preference for the starter trio types. However, there really are no viable water types to catch, so the only one that can complete the trio is Quaquaval. We're going to give it Scovillain for great coverage and a convenient completion of the type trio. I'll get to ground type soon because we need to address ghost type coverage. Ghost has weakness to only dark and ghost. Quaquaval has no ghost type coverage, so our ghost coverage options are Ceruledge, Lokix, and Houndstone. We already have a fire type, and Ceruledge is a version exclusive anyway, so we need to choose between Lokix and Houndstone. Bug is an interesting extra type, and we prefer dual types to monotypes, so let's go with Lokix. Meowscarada needs a fire type to complete as much of the trio as possible, and our only options are Ceruledge and Armarouge. Ceruledge is the same ghost type as Annihilape, so it would be redundant. Armarouge, however, offers a good dual type, and Psychic is a great addition to the current team. We're not going to look at the way Ceruledge or Armarouge's secondary typing affects coverage, and in reality, it won't matter because at the end those types will get covered elsewhere. Now for ground type. We can do Clodsire or Toedscruel, which both happen to be alternatives to prior generation Pokemon. Meowscarada should use Clodsire because it already has grass type, and same with Quaquaval. This addition is especially helpful for Meowscarada's team and adds 4 new coverages. For Skeledurge, let's add Toedscruel. It has way higher base stats than Clodsire and gives a much needed grass type to the team. At this point, all three teams have great coverage, and the final picks are about getting those last types out of the way and picking the strongest Pokemon. Fighting types' weaknesses are Fairy, Psychic, and Flying type, and so far none of our teams have any fighting coverage. I am totally comfortable giving all three Pokemon Tinkaton because it's a reasonable choice that can be found early game, and the Pokemon probably has the best typing in the entire series. Now the teams are all almost done. With the least amount of Pokemon so far, Skeledirge has complete type coverage, and the other two are only missing Flying type. For Meowscarada and Quaquaval's flying coverage, the only options are Garganacl, Kilowattrel, and Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur has the highest stat total of any Pokemon on this list, so it's an obvious choice here. The Grass and Water teams are set now, so it's just up to the Fire team. Baxcalibur is just such an easy Pokemon to throw on here because of its insane power and unique typing. Our final Pokemon is also a free pick. The best strategy is going to be to pick the Pokemon with the next highest base stat total that isn't already covered. I've crossed out the types that we already have on our team. The three obvious contenders are Garganacl, Farigiraf, and Mabosstiff. If we go according to the rules I said, Garganacl and Mabosstiff are automatically crossed out for not being dual type, but the other Pokemon is only a 2-stage. I'm willing to waive the dual type preference here because we've already hit all the types. Mabosstiff is a great physical attacker which could complement Skeledirge's special attack focus. Garganacl is a 3-stage though, and its early presence might make it way more fun to use and evolve. And Farigiraf has the highest BST and a really good type combination with only weakness to Dark and Bug. Honestly, any of the three will work and it's totally up to you. So important observations. All the teams do indeed have Tinkaton and Baxcalibur, which makes sense because both Pokemon are super useful and powerful. Two of the teams have Clodsire, which has the lowest base stat total of all the Pokemon we could pick. Clodsire is offensively kind of mediocre and has an absurdly low speed stat of 20, but the Pokemon actually does have its uses. It has a great HP of 130 and pretty good defenses and has a good combination of setup and offensive moves that actually make it pretty useful. A moveset with Clodsire I'd recommend is Poison Jab, Earthquake, Stealth Rock, and Toxic Spikes, and you can always swap out Stealth Rock with Yawn or another move you think will be useful. Unless you play the game exactly the way they intend you to, you might be pretty underleveled by the time you beat the 8th gym. I beat so many late game fights by poison stalling, which is a little undeserved, but overall shows how useful Clodsire is as an opener. Clodsire's water absorbability is also really awesome and completely eliminates a common weakness. Each of the starters has its own strengths and weaknesses for team building. I think Quaquaval has the most obviously useful types since there are no other water types that are worth playing with. I suppose the Palafin line is an evolving water type line, but it's totally gimmicky and involves entering the hero form, which I think would detract from a playthrough. But either way, it's your choice. Quaquaval is the only one who completes a water, fire, grass trio, and having the fighting type also gives you more freedom to pick other Pokemon. However, the other fighting types you can choose from are actually all pretty useful. For Skeledirge, I would highly recommend getting a Pawmot as fast as possible. These two Pokemon cover each other's weaknesses surprisingly well, and are a good balance of special and physical attackers for early game. Ground type will give you a hard time, but they're not common in challenges until mid to late game. Skeledirge's team also ends up having full type coverage faster than any of the other teams, which gives you the freedom to have fun with the Pokemon you pick. Early game, you will sweep through the bug and grass gyms, and Pawmot can carry against the early Titans. Meowscarada is an interesting one. I think the team is decent, and even better if you pick Scarlet so you can use Armarouge. If you end up picking Violet and you don't want to use Ceruledge because of the redundant ghost typing, then you would lose coverage against bugs. In that case, I would say choose a flying or rock type, but my choice would be Kilowattrel. This also helps against grass, which you won't have any coverage against until Baxcalibur, who comes pretty late in the game. Overall, all the teams look pretty solid, but it's nice to see how diverse they can get. I played Pokemon Scarlet, and here's the team I used choosing Fuecoco. I got a Pawmi first, and soon after got a Paldea and Wooper. By the time I was at the second gym, I also got a smaller. Pretty soon after, I got a Tinkatink. I didn't get Frigibax until like the 6th or 7th gym. In hindsight, Arboliva really wasn't strong enough for my team, and I don't think I used it very well. It was only useful against ground types, and it rarely saw any time in battle. Tinkaton and Baxcalibur are both so fun to use, and are easily some of the best new Pokemon available. Okay, editor's note. It turns out you actually can catch Glimmet well before Area 0, but it's not very common. This doesn't really change any of the team placements, but I suppose you can throw it onto the Skeledirge 4th spot as well. The other teams need Clodsire as a ground type, so it has no place there due to its shared poison typing. So there you have it. Obviously, there are so many ways that these teams could have gone, and I think if you picked slightly different rules or changed their order, you could have ended up with a completely different team. If you pick a different second Pokemon, the team could end up totally different too, but I think that's what makes these questions so interesting to try to answer. These are just my thoughts, so let me know what team you picked in the comments and if there's anything I've missed. If you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and like.